All right, guys, I love this story because it shows you like how behind mainstream media is on a lot of this stuff. So it's being reported in the Daily Beast. Joe Rogan reveals he's rejected Trump multiple times for an interview. Rogan recently declared his support for Ron DeSantis. On Tuesday, he said he's absolutely no Trump fan and has no desire to assist him, quote, in any way, shape, or form. So Joe Rogan went on Lex Fridman's podcast, and Trump came up one way or another pretty early on in the podcast. And Joe said, look, yeah, I've rejected multiple. They've reached out. His people have reached out to me multiple times. I've rejected them for an interview every time. And he goes on to explain, like, I don't want to help him in any way, shape, or form, even if it's inadvertently. And also, it's like, it's not just shooting the shit and talking to somebody if you're talking to the president of the United States, either a current one or a former one. Like, there's a lot of responsibility that goes hand in hand with that. And Rogan seems to understand that, and he says that. You know, Rogan might approach most of his conversations like he's just shooting the shit with a buddy. And that may be one of the reasons why his podcast is so phenomenally popular. But he understands when you're dealing with a president or a former president or somebody with that much power that, you know what? He feels like I'd kind of be in over my head. I don't want to assist him in any way, shape, or form, even if it's inadvertently, and I'd want to ask him the right questions. But it's amazing that, like, the media just now is talking about this. Rogan has mentioned this before on his show, rejecting Trump for interviews. He's mentioned it on his show before. I've mentioned it on my show. Not that anybody in mainstream media is watching my show or monitoring my show, but I mentioned it on my show. And why do I know that? How do I know that? Because when Joe was considering having on Donald Trump, you know who he reached out to? Me. He emailed me and asked me, hey, what questions would you ask him if you had the ability to interview him? Because if I'm going to talk to him, I'm going to take it seriously, and I want to ask good adversarial questions. And I sent him back a response and said, hey, I made a list of like 10 or 15, whatever it was, questions. And I sent it to him and I said, here's what you should ask. And then ultimately I spoke to him later on, and Joe was like, look, I decided just not to have him on. I don't think I'm up to it. And, you know, like he said, I don't want to help him. I don't want to help him. And he thought that they were viewing it as, yes, let's talk to Joe because Joe will help us. They, in the same way that mainstream media typecast Joe as just a standard right-winger, Trump and his team sort of typecast Joe as a standard right-winger and Team Trump. And that just isn't true. Now, Joe did come out in favor of Ron DeSantis recently, which, I mean, he's a right-wing guy, right? Ron DeSantis is. So if Joe's supporting him, by extension, you're supporting right-wing politics. So now it is a different situation, right? Before he was supporting Bernie Sanders. That is not right-wing stuff. So, but now he's supporting Ron DeSantis. That is right-wing stuff. Okay, so, but either way, he's not a fan of Trump. And he didn't want to help Trump. And he always had that position, but people just assumed he didn't have that position because they typecast him. Okay. Supporting Ron DeSantis is bad enough. And I've gone after Joe for that, and I've explained the reasons why Ron DeSantis, even according to Joe's own ideology, is an unacceptable presidential candidate. Anyway, all right, so let's go through some of this and give more specifics here. Joe Rogan claimed this week that Donald Trump has repeatedly asked to appear on his popular podcast, only for the controversial podcaster to shoot down the offers because he's not interested in helping Trump. By the way, let me correct that just a little bit. It's not like Trump himself was talking to Rogan. It was Trump's team reaching out to Rogan. That's what it was. Okay. Just days after backing GOP Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for president. Oh, by the way, the reason why I say that is because now I wouldn't be surprised if Trump comes out on his Truth Social and goes after Joe Rogan now because Joe says, I don't want to help Trump. Now Trump might go after Joe and say, I never want to go on his podcast. I never talked to him ever before in my life. That'd be Trump's Weasley way on a technicality of getting out of it when Trump knows damn well his team reached out to Rogan. Okay. Just days after backing GOP Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for president, the charter member of the so-called intellectual dark web also pointed out that he is not a Trump supporter in any way, shape, or form. Now, every article on this, there's been a bunch, keeps bringing up, he supports Ron DeSantis, he supports Ron DeSantis, he supports Ron DeSantis, and they're trying to make the argument, or at least imply, the reason why Joe doesn't want to help Trump is because he likes Ron DeSantis. No, Trump, when he was still president, back when he was still president, was trying to get on Rogan's podcast, and even then, before Joe knew anything about Ron DeSantis, he didn't want Trump on. So just so everybody understands, those things are not linked. Those things are not linked. It's not like Joe was saying, I don't want to interview Trump because I like Ron DeSantis, all the way back when Trump was president. Joe probably didn't even know who Ron DeSantis was at the time. Okay, just to get that out there. Talking to fellow podcast host Lex Fridman earlier this week, Rogan remarked that the Trump era is also going to be one of the weirder times in recent history. When people look back historically about the division in this country, he's such a polarizing figure that so many people felt like they could abandon their own ethics and morals and principles just to attack him. And anybody who supports him because he is an existential threat to democracy itself, the UFC commentator continued. After Friedman suggested Trump was more a symptom than the cause and that it's going to get weirder, Rogan noted that the twice impeached ex-president is likely going to run for the White House again in 2024. At the same time, he said Trump has had a good chance to win if he faces off with President Joe Biden. Quote, well, he's running against a dead man, you know? I mean, Biden shakes hands with people that aren't even there when he gets off stage. I think he's seeing ghosts, Rogan snarked. He also criticized Biden's recent appearance on Jimmy Kimmel's late night talk show, saying the president was just rambling, and that if he were Trump or another Republican, every fucking talk show would be screaming for him to be off the air. Still, despite his overt criticism of Biden's performance as president, the star podcaster, who has achieved hero status on the right for his transphobic and anti-vaccine commentary, sorry, my COVID is acting up, wanted it known that he was no Trump fan and that he's repeatedly rejected overtures from Trump's camp. By the way, I'm not a Trump supporter in any way, shape, or form, he declared. I've had the opportunity to have him on my show more than once. I've said no every time. I don't want to help him. I'm not interested in helping him. With a whiff of skepticism, Friedman insisted that Rogan would eventually have him on, noting how the host has said he doesn't care about politics and instead is interested in having a good conversation with his guest. And I think like you had Kanye on, for example, and you had a great conversation with them, Friedman added, referencing Rogan's interview with MAGA-boosting rap superstar. Yeah, but Kanye's an artist, Rogan retorted. Kanye, doing well or not doing well, doesn't change the course of our country. Rogan's complete rejection of Trump and recent endorsement of DeSantis comes as conservatives are increasingly ditching the ex-president amid the explosive January 6th committee hearings. Trump, meanwhile, is reportedly preparing to officially announce a 2024 bid soon in an effort to blunt the political damage from the hearings and steal headlines from the potential GOP rivals like DeSantis. A Trump spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Yeah, so again, that implication there at the end is like, oh, the reason why Rogan doesn't want to have on Trump is because he doesn't want to help Trump, particularly because he supports DeSantis. But Joe rejected Trump coming on way back before he even knew who DeSantis was. When Trump was president, he wanted to sit down with Rogan. And again, Rogan said no. He thought about it. He was close to doing it. He reached out to me and I'm sure a bunch of other people. I gave him a list of questions, like basically, hey, if you're going to interview him, here are the real questions you should ask him. And I don't know, he just felt like, I don't want to inadvertently help him. I don't know if he felt like I could be adversarial, but then when he pushes back, am I going to be able to follow up and be aggressive? Like, this is a sitting president of the United States. It's a lot to ask. It's a lot of pressure. And so he decided he doesn't want to do it. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Rogan has said before, I don't want to have, I'm like out of politics. I don't want anything to do with politics. But, you know, then he endorsed Ron DeSantis, which is very political to say the least. And by the way, Ron DeSantis is against raising the minimum wage. He's against legalizing marijuana, which is an issue that Rogan cares deeply about. He says he cares deeply about it. We know he cares deeply about it. DeSantis has done a number of things that are deeply against free speech. You know, loosening the laws when it comes to protests. If somebody runs over a protester, hey, it is what it is. Banned protesting out in front of private residences. Even if the private residence is that of somebody with power. State politician. Judge. Ban that. So, you know, and I can go on and on here. Deep corruption. More Per Union had a great video describing how he cutting taxes for the wealthy, giving subsidies to corporations as he's hosing working people and shifting a tax burden onto them. So, I mean, he's deeply right-wing and he's terrible. I don't know how I got to this point. But it's funny that now the media is catching up like, oh, wait, hold on. We had sort of typecast Joe as a Trump supporter, but it turns out he's not a Trump supporter, so that's weird. And it's funny because even now I even saw some like resistance liberal types on Twitter, some like pro-Democrats types who all of a sudden they were treating Rogan like a hero because Rogan said these things about Trump. But I guess those people didn't realize that Rogan also endorsed DeSantis, which should make them hate him for that reason. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's just funny how like mainstream media sort of lags way behind things that we've known have happened a long time ago. And he's talked about it before. Rogan has. I've talked about it before. It just never caught on with mainstream media. Now they get a whiff of it and they're like, oh, okay. Maybe he's not exactly what we portrayed him as. Look, he's certainly backing a right-wing candidate. He's backing DeSantis. I would argue DeSantis is just as bad as Donald Trump. But they had him pegged as a Trump supporter, specifically Trump, and he's clearly not that. And now, hey, at least they know that much, and at least they've now tweaked the narrative slightly. But what I would say is, come on, guys, catch up. We've known this for a while. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.